Welcome to Well Warrior Culture, a community of support based on my books, Wellness Warrior Style, Mindfulness for Warriors, the Mindfulness for Warriors Handbook, and the 21-Day Meditation Jumpstart Journal. This is the Well Warrior Show, and I'm your host, Kim Colegrove. I work with society's warriors, protectors, guardians, and healers, and your families to help you rebuild resilience and embrace well-being. If your profession exposes you to trauma and the trauma of others, Well Warrior Culture is for you. You deserve to live, work, and retire healthfully, and I'm glad you're here. And now, on with the show. Hello, and welcome to the Well Warrior Show. I'm your host, Kim Colegrove. Today I'm sitting down with Wendy Bundy, and I'm really looking forward to this conversation. Wendy is a former 911 dispatcher, and I haven't spoken with a dispatcher yet, even though I do have one in my first book, Mindfulness for Warriors, and that was a great conversation. But I'm really looking forward to talking to Wendy today. Wendy, welcome to the Well Warrior Show. Tell us a little bit about yourself.
Thanks, Kim, and thanks for having me on the show. So I am indeed a former 911 dispatcher. I started in this interesting career path straight out of high school, did it for almost 7 years, met my spouse in this line of work, and he's now been in the field over 15 years. So even though I left and have explored some other things, I'm still very connected to the field. And I spend a good portion of my time volunteering, trying to give back to this community and those who are still sitting under the headset and sharing some things with them that I learned after leaving that I wish I had known when I was still in that role.
Excellent. And that's exactly why I wanted to talk to you. So I'm really glad you're here. Let's start by talking about your early years as a dispatcher, because you were very young when you got started. And can you share with us some of the mental, emotional, physical, schedule, whatever those were, some of the struggles that you can recognize are pretty ubiquitous across all of dispatch?
Absolutely. Yeah, I got thrown in, like I said, right out of high school. I trained actually on the weekends while I was still in my senior year. And then by that summer when I graduated, that center was so short staffed and it's in a small rural area. So pretty tiny, only 2 people to a shift most of the time. A lot of people wanting to take vacations during the summer. So I was turned loose working with, just one other person pretty quickly and got into a lot of overtime in that first year. I remember around Christmas time going to a supervisor and being like, I'm working 14 days straight. Did you realize that I was working that many days straight so soon? And just having to have those conversations about my well-being, then. And I didn't really even register the impact that it was having on me at that point. I was just caught in the cycle of work, sleep, home for a little bit, 12-hour shifts. Most of them were overnights. Sometimes I was flopping back and forth to days, depending on the need, but a lot of night shifts. And ultimately, that's where I ended up, was on night shift for many years. So yeah, all of those things really messed with me. My sleep schedule, being able to spend time with family. I'd met this person that I was planning to marry, and he's also working in that field, and we're juggling getting to know each other and getting to know like our role together as a couple, and still trying to balance working in that small center. It was definitely a rough couple of years, and then top that off with some very traumatic calls. I had some hard hits very early on and kind of back to back almost. One involving an officer that actually ended up turning out okay, but at the time he was hit head on, and so we didn't know the outcome right away. So that time that you're sitting there kind of waiting to find out what happened. I also had an officer involved shooting that thankfully turned out okay, but in those moments you don't know when the worst goes through your mind. And then I also experienced the loss of a small child in a house fire.
Oh boy. Okay,
Yeah.
let's break each one of those down just for a moment, because I know there are people listening who have taken those kind of calls that have impacted them.
Mhm.
So one thing that I learned many years ago when I first got into this work, I went to my local, um, one of my local police departments, a pretty big metropolitan police department, and did kind of a ride along in dispatch. And one of the dispatch supervisors, who is my friend, who's in my first book, she gave me a tour and showed me the call taker side and dispatch side. And the idea was that I was going to sit with a dispatcher for a while and kind of take in a shift and really quickly into my kind of ride along. I call it a ride along because I'm, I feel like it's very similar.
Mhm.
And one of the calls that came in was, I'm just not even going to really describe it, but it was a mother calling in who had found her young teenage child who had attempted suicide. And I had just a couple of years before that lost two of my family members to suicide. And I was really caught off guard by that call. And I couldn't believe my instant response, my instant emotional response. So I had to get up and go out in the hall, and I immediately started crying, and it was just all this stuff. And I was embarrassed. I was really embarrassed. The supervisor took me into there was this kind of a little command center in the middle where she could then open up and she could hear the officer, the caller, the dispatcher. And so I kind of composed myself, but not completely. Anyway, that was an eye opener for me. And I kept thinking afterwards, this is something the average citizen needs to understand about what dispatchers do,
Mhm.
because I had a big reaction. I got instantly emotional. The dispatch supervisor comforted me. I went out in the hall and collected myself. Dispatchers don't have the ability to do any of that ever, because they have to handle the call calmly. And then there's always another call waiting. Usually there's another call that's, coming in. So talk about those calls when officers were in trouble, and that space where you don't know if they're okay or if it's going to be okay. Do you mind talking about that a little bit?
Sure. So looking back on it, and of course, all of this was hard to see when I was still in it. It's taken me many years of counseling and reflection and um, various other tools to get to the point where I can talk about it to the extent that I do these days. So I just want to be fully transparent with that. But looking back in those moments, I was very fortunate to have a good dispatch partner that we worked so well with. As a matter of fact, it ended up being the dispatcher that I married. So
Oh,
we worked very well, very in sync on those shifts together. We had each other's back truly and wholeheartedly. And when other staff did come in, because in those days, and with it being such a small community, small center, people listened to the radios at home and in the community. If they heard something, they would come in to assist. So we did have the occasion where they would hear this, horrible traffic, and they would come in to see if we needed help. And honestly, we didn't want to move out of our seats. The two of us, we felt like we had it. We needed to stay there and see it through. Those were our officers, our shift, and it was like we were taking ownership of it. And as much as we appreciated them coming in and they were sitting in the back of the room, kind of, you know, can you please take a break? Would you like to walk outside? Trying their best to help us. We were like, nope, we're good, because we really wanted to make sure that we were a part of what had gotten started. Like it was hard to pull away from it. And again, looking back, I probably should have taken that support and taken those breaks when they were offered. But I didn't. And, I think that being in that feeling where you have that obligation and wanting to make sure that everyone's okay, that's a lot for any human being to take on. And that's where I think I'd like to see more of the culture shift in this line of work, that it's okay if there's other people there to support you and to take over, to take that back seat, to walk out, to take a breather, because that's going to help your overall mindset as you process through what has happened after the fact.
really, really good point. I'm sure it's very difficult for someone to do, but that is very healthy counsel.
Mm-hmm.
So it's probably not always possible. And I know there are a lot of dispatch centers where there isn't anyone to come and, relieve you. And shout out to the people who would listen on the radio and come in and want to support you guys. That's actually really cool.
Yeah, I mean, it really was, and like I said, in those moments, I don't think we appreciated it for what it was.
Yeah,
I
maybe it was a little annoying at the
Right,
time.
yeah,
Yeah,
it
yeah.
seemed a little annoying, like they were maybe in the way, but, looking back, I think we really need to say kudos to them for listening and for stepping up and for coming in to support us.
Yeah.
Mhm.
So when you're, under the headset and there's something happening like that, so with you, you told two different stories, but similar stories where there was an officer in trouble, and you didn't know until later. Sometimes it's much later before you find out because a lot of times you move on to the next call or whatever is transpiring on the call. You aren't privy to that information until later. But a lot of dispatchers never get to hear how it turned out. They never know the ending. And that was something else that I learned and that has really stuck with me and I feel would be so difficult, but they just have to live with it. I mean, it could be something devastating like an officer trying to resuscitate a child or a suicide attempt, and they may never know what happened. Can you speak to that a little bit?
Sure, I mean, there are countless calls that I handled that I don't know the outcomes to. Um, I can't even remember all the different call types, but yeah, many that once they were transported to the hospital, we never heard anything else because it wasn't like we could pick up the phone and be like, hey, I just took that call. Can you tell me how this person's doing? That's not how it works. A lot of times, like you mentioned, it's so busy, there's other calls going on. Even on the night shift, when it wasn't a lot of calls going on or we did have downtime, it just wasn't in the protocol for you to be able to do that. Um, because you have HIPAA and you have all of these other things that are
Yeah.
in place. So technically, you're not supposed to find out some of those things. It's about someone's medical history. So yeah, you're left just kind of wondering, like, oh, that was a really bad accident, and we flew this person out. I wonder how they're doing, and unless by some connection, and I'm seeing this happen a little bit more now in our community with the size of it, and of course with social media and Facebook and things, that families are now, giving reports back to the community as a whole and letting people know. So then you can kind of connect the dots. But again, that's more in a small town situation, and I'm sure that that's not the case for many people that work in larger centers and bigger communities.
Interesting. Yeah. So for dispatchers that might be listening, I think it's just something for to be aware of and not discounting what a heavy burden that is to carry mentally and emotionally, and how
Mhm.
important it is then to find tools and resources or a support system to help you deal with some of that mentally and emotionally, rather than thinking that it's just part of your job and part of your job is to just carry that stuff. And
Mhm.
then for non-dispatchers, these are the people I really want to educate about some of this. For non-dispatchers, um, I think the public just really doesn't understand what you guys do, what you
Mhm.
hear, what you endure, and the talent that it takes to stay clear-minded and calm,
Mhm.
because very frequently the person on the other end is everything but calm. It might very well be the worst day of their life. And I think the general public doesn't really understand it, in my opinion, or really appreciate the job that you do. You guys are the first line first responders, the first responders. You
Mhm.
are the first one on scene, only you're not on scene. You're the first ones involved. So I don't think people really appreciate or understand that. I understand that in some states, dispatchers are still categorized as clerical,
Mhm.
and there are this then that blows me away. Um, and also, I don't know that the average person understands the mental and emotional burden that this job can be. And from my perspective in the work that I do, and most people who listen to this know that I do this work because I lost my own husband to suicide just after he retired from a 30-year law enforcement career. I feel like the public doesn't really understand the dedication and what first responders do for society. One, what would we do without you? I say this all the time. What would we do without our public safety people? It would just be chaos. We would live in utter chaos. And two, we have not done a very good job of taking care of you guys. As a society, we should have done a better job of understanding what you're offering us, and we should have done a better job of taking care of you guys. And that's beginning. I think that started in the past decade or so. It's ramped up in the past 5 years. I see it improving, but it's still not good.
Right.
Right.
We have a long way to go.
We have a long way to go. And to that point, you do some speaking in this arena, correct?
I do. Yeah. So I guess it was around the time that really everyone was sitting home during COVID. I got heavily involved with NAMI, the National Alliance on Mental Illness, and started taking some of their educational programs, and then actually training to be a presenter in some of their programs. They have one called In Our Own Voice, and another one called Ending the Silence, which are big on, sharing your story, for the sake of creating change and letting others know also that they're not alone in the struggles they're going through. And for everything that I had encountered in public safety, that type of setting and being able to craft my story and share it for that purpose was huge. So I was the dispatcher that really didn't like to talk. I had a lot of people that told me that. I would talk when I needed to on the radio and documenting my calls and stuff. But outside of that, I was very introverted. And so I never thought I would be a public speaker in any way, shape, or form. But like I said, COVID happened. I got involved with that wonderful group, and that really opened a lot of doors for me. And so then fast forward here a couple of years, I've now been doing conference presentations, and I've been fortunate in the state of Virginia where I live to do our Virginia APCO and NINA. They're combined into one group, their conference for the past 2 years. The first year I told my story of having been diagnosed with complex PTSD from working in the dispatch setting. And then the second year that I went back, I focused it more on maintaining your own health and wellness and shared some of these tools and tips, some of the different practices that I've started using now for my well-being that I think would be very helpful for those that are still doing this type of work. And I'm really excited that I'm actually flying to Orlando in less than 2 weeks to speak at the National NINA conference this year and do a similar presentation.
Wow, that's so amazing. My favorite part is that you are a self-described introvert and never thought that you would be a public speaker. If you see me looking down, it's because I'm taking notes. I want to make sure I don't miss any of this. So you've gone from someone who really didn't like to speak a lot. You were like a kind of a quiet introverted person to someone who is now going to speak at the National APCO and NINA conference in Orlando, Florida.
Yeah, well,
That's
the National
amazing.
NINA one, not because they're on the national level, they're separate. Yeah.
Oh, okay. So it's the NINA.
It's the NINA one. Yep.
I've spoken at an APCO NINA in Nebraska one time, and really great people, and very, very, my experience of it was they were very, very open and interested in anything wellness, anything stress relief. I mean, like very open-minded, open, fun group, honestly.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's not always the case it's not always the case. I mean, sometimes, when I'm working with law enforcement, sometimes in the beginning I wouldn't exactly call them open to my information, but usually by the end of the presentation, they come around.
Right.
So I had let's see what I want to ask you about that. I know. So you started off as a NAMI presenter.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's really what started the public speaking aspect of all of this for me. Mm-hmm.
Okay. And how long have you been speaking at the dispatch conferences?
Let's see, for about two years at the state level. I've also done some kind of one-off virtual conferences. Like I've done the Dare to Be Great, which is all virtual. There was another one that I did, and I'm blanking on the name now because they start running together after a while. But yeah, I've done a couple that were virtual, and then those were in person. So I'll talk to anyone that invites me, and if I can get there in person, I'll certainly do that as well.
That's outstanding. Okay, so I'm just going to do a little plug here for anyone who's listening. Wendy is available for speaking gigs. So if you're looking for someone with dispatch background and, well versed and well trained in the mental health aspect, we'll give you some contact information before we wrap up today. Are you willing to, and don't feel any pressure, but are you willing to talk about your diagnosis of CPT?
It's a tongue twister, right?
It
Yeah.
is complex post-traumatic stress disorder. Are you willing to speak about that?
Yeah, I mean, I'm really open about it. Are there specific questions that you have, or are you just looking for more of an overview of like how I got the diagnosis, how long I waited, that
It's
kind
yeah. So I'm thinking about anyone who might be listening who knows I'm really not good. I'm really not good, but they haven't sought any treatment yet, or they haven't sought any support yet, and they kind of don't know what to do. So I guess I'm thinking about what would be some indicators, maybe some signs. Who might they start? Who might they speak with first?
of?
And
Okay.
just if you don't mind, kind of sharing, because I am always trying to think who might be listening that might take something away from this conversation that might help them take at least one step in the right direction to help themselves.
Yes. So with talking about that, let me give you a little bit of a timeline because I think that's important in this conversation. I left my full-time dispatching gig for the first time in 2012. I did go back and try it again in 2016 for a couple of months, and that was kind of my testing the waters to see if I could get back into the field or not, and ultimately deciding that other routes were better for me. But 2012 was when I left because things were so bad that I knew I needed some sort of help, but I didn't know what at that point.
So when
And
you went back, you hadn't gotten any help for the post-traumatic stress
I
symptoms.
I had not been officially diagnosed or gotten the level of help that I needed at that point. No. I waited many years and struggled and went through a lot of cycles and relied on my family heavily to financially support me, which I still feel really guilty about. But the biggest thing that I tell people is earlier interventions. Please seek help earlier. There's evidence and research now that shows us it's better outcomes, and I don't want anyone to wait the amount of time that I did because my diagnosis did not happen until 2018.
Oh, wow.
So many years of those cycles, and what that looked like in between there was a lot of job hopping, staying at a job only like a couple of months, and when people would start to get close, I would shut the doors down and say, nope, can't do this. Can't have any tough conversations. I wasn't a good advocate for myself in any way, shape, or form. I was not sleeping well. I had erratic sleep schedules. Part of that was probably due to working the night shift for so long, too, and what that had done to my system. I had gained a lot of weight and wasn't eating very healthy either. So over the years, I've lost close to 100 pounds, and now I have a much healthier relationship with food and eating. And at one point, I was diagnosed with irritable bowel syndrome. I believe that that was a misdiagnosis, and the PTSD was the correct one. A lot of things were showing up for me through the stomach. For those who maybe don't know or haven't read any of the research, we have a second brain that's in our stomach, in our gut, and so that's why people like me sometimes feel things in their stomach first, and that's how some of these symptoms really show up. It was really painful for me at times. I would lay on the floor in pain using heating pads. I've almost burnt myself with heating pads, just trying to control the pain that I was feeling in my stomach.
I think that a lot of people in this line of work have gut problems. A lot.
Mm.
I think it's very prevalent and a myriad of gut issues. And while I was getting ready this morning to talk to you, I was listening to a podcast that was talking about this very thing and
Mhm.
how the nervous system impacts our gut health and our digestion. And it's really important stuff. I plan to take some deep dives into this information and to do more podcasts in the future that are a little more well researched and kind of a deeper dive into some of this, because I think there are a lot of people, and I'm guessing back then you had no idea about the mind body connection.
Yep.
Yeah, and how the mental and emotional um, stuff that we used to always think we kept separate, how that can impact our physical body. So stay tuned, everybody. We're going to do a lot more on this. But yeah, I'm glad that you bring that up. And so anyone who's listening who is having a lot of physical health problems, and it can be, there's a long list, headaches, there's all kinds of issues. But that gut thing seems to be prevalent. Thank you for bringing that up.
Yeah, and a lot of these things can look like other medical conditions. So then if you're going to a medical doctor, like a family practitioner, sometimes it's really hard to get them to see past some of that. There's still a lot of stigma, and the medical field operates very differently. Even today, if I go into my family doctor and I start talking about some holistic type practices, I get shut down. They're like, nope, we can't talk about that with you. If you want holistic stuff, you need to go to a different type of provider. So learning also what you need from your doctor, having like a good list of things you want to talk with them about. And if you feel like you're getting shut down in those conversations, don't be afraid to go to another doctor. I fought for probably close to a year to get a referral to a GI specialist. And that was when I had all the stuff going on and finally did get the irritable bowel syndrome diagnosis. But it took quite a while. And during that time, none of these doctors that I saw, both at the family level or the GI specialist, none of them asked me questions that I can remember about my mental health state, or tried to see if there were any other things and make referrals to a psychologist or a psychiatrist or any of those. That did not happen. So then, I'm stuck in these cycles, and I was told to eat more fiber, drink more water, those kind of things to take care of the irritable bowel syndrome. And they helped a little bit here and there. I'm not going to say that they didn't, but it wasn't entirely what I needed. And so what really helped in 2018 was a psychiatrist who grew up in our area, and she had moved away to New York and had actually worked with the New York Police Department. And so she comes back to our area and starts her own private practice here. And I read her background and her story, and I was like, if anybody's going to understand what I've got going on, it's her, because she's worked with public safety. But I still was very hesitant to make that first appointment. I think I went back and forth for probably a good 3 months on making that first appointment, and, talking with my husband and just a few other people that were in my close circle to get the encouragement to make that appointment. And once I did that, things started turning around pretty quickly, because then I got the diagnosis. She made recommendations for mindfulness. So there was a workbook that she gave me, and I had never been exposed to that. And I was like, you want me to do what? Like, you want me to sit and do these breathing exercises? There was an audio file that went with it that was a 45-minute body scan. And I had the worst trouble doing that body scan. Like, I tried it and I was persistent and kept giving it a chance. Now body scans are actually one of my favorite things.
Yeah. So can I pause you right there?
Sure.
So what was the roadblock? Like, what was your difficulty? Because what I try to do when I work with people with mindfulness and meditation, breathing exercises, I find a lot of people that say they can't get through it. They can't do it. They try, and they're dedicated people, and they have discipline, and so I always say, well, if you can't do 45 minutes, start with 5 minutes and see how that goes. So I'm always trying to give people flexibility. So what were your roadblocks with the 45-minute body scan in the beginning?
Well, I was falling asleep during it, for one. So probably like 20 minutes in, I would fall asleep, and then I wasn't sure that it was really being effective or doing what it was supposed to do. Again, after looking back now, I'm realizing my body was probably exhausted, and that's what it needed. It really needed the rest. And so that's what it was defaulting to.
Yeah. So to me, that sounds like a successful body scan. You just couldn't do the 45 minutes. And a lot of people will say, I tried to do that 30-minute guided relaxation. I tried to do a 15-minute meditation, but I keep falling asleep. Why do I keep falling asleep? And I say, because you're tired. You're exhausted, like you're in your cells, in your bones. You're so exhausted. It might take some time to train your brain and body
Yeah.
into these new practices. Yeah.
Yeah, and when you say it takes some time, that varies widely from person to person. I would say it took me a good probably 2 years of consistently going back and trying it again or trying a different audio file, trying one that was maybe a little bit shorter, exploring different apps. I love the Calm app. I also love one called Tapping Solutions. So just trying very different things and being open to seeing what sticks, what's helpful, what's not. What intrigued you enough that you want to pick it up and try it again, kind of thing. So I think the mindset behind it is important too, to constantly be curious and be open to see what's helpful.
Yeah, I agree so much. So what do we do about skeptics? Because I encounter a lot of skeptics that think this is hoo-ha. So I mean, how I'm always trying to come up with gentle ways to encourage skeptics. Like, well, how bad do you feel? Aren't you willing to try something, just to kind of open your mind? Yeah.
Mhm.
What do you think about that?
I think just getting them to talk about it is at least planting the seed and a step in the right direction. I also use a lot of humor when I talk about it. So I also worked for a little over a year for the Department of Corrections here in our state on what they called an employee health and wellness team. It was a new initiative that they were starting up. And so part of that, I got to go around and talk to people at their different work sites and do some really fun workshops with them. And I did one at the academy that was focused on like an entire mental health curriculum that I had put together. And I put this little 5-minute video in it of laughter yoga, like a little laughter exercise. And I encouraged them to get up, and do this exercise with the woman in the video. She's doing it for part of a TED talk. And she was just phenomenal at the way she did this. And I, did the motions along because she's taking the brain out and she's flossing the brain and she's the whole time that she's doing this. And so I'm like being silly, letting my guard down, which doesn't happen in public safety a lot. But I'm doing that because we're in a safe classroom environment and showing them that it's okay. And even though many of them did not do it with me, after that class ended, they were still talking about it. And so I was like, okay, whether you realize it or not, like I did my job today. I got you to experience something different. And now you're going to go and you're going to be talking about it and you're going to be sharing it with other folks. And maybe the next time that I see you, you'll actually be, done it again and you'll be a little bit more serious about it. So I think it's just being creative with kind of plugging it into different places and showing them that it's okay. And that's hopefully what's going to change some of the culture and mindset.
For sure. That's so great. Now I want to go look up that. There's a TED talk that's like a laughing yoga practice.
Yep, it's about 5 minutes and it's a TED talk and it's either called laughter yoga or laughter exercise. And
I'm going to find that, I think, and include the link in the show notes for this so people can go take a look at that. So I know you're aware of this, but I'm going to throw a little neuroscience plug in there that's connected with the story you just told us. What happened in that classroom through your creativity and your fearlessness to be vulnerable and be silly is you broke through because you got them talking about it. So you broke through, and what happened to them is their brain started to develop a new neural pathway. Like it created or developed a new neural pathway. It opened them up to something new, and that's huge. We talk about this in our Pause First Academy courses quite a bit. So good for you. You just understand this all from experience, but also organically. I can tell that you've just connected in with this mind body thing, and you first did it on yourself. Proved it to yourself. And
right.
so, but I can tell you have this organic connection now, like, oh, this just makes sense.
It does.
Yeah.
And it clicks, like it really clicks. But it does, it takes some time to get to that point. my husband, he's got over 15 years in this line of work, and I'm still, plugging and trying different things with him each day. And I don't think it's really clicked yet, but he's open to the process and he's slowly getting there.
Nice, nice, nice. Yeah, and there's a lot of different approaches. So if anyone listening is like, yeah, no thanks on the yoga, no thanks on the laughing yoga, no thanks on the meditation. There are so many different approaches and practices and just some simple breathing exercises. So my goodness, if you are struggling or suffering and your stress levels are off the charts and you know that you probably have at least symptoms of post-traumatic stress, maybe not a diagnosis, but you don't have to have a diagnosis or even be, um, uh, I don't know what the word is. You don't have to be someone who receives a diagnosis of PTSD to experience very similar or the same symptoms.
Yes.
Yeah, and I want to let people off the hook about that. Even if you go and you get treatment and then you don't get that diagnosis, that doesn't mean that you aren't suffering from post-traumatic stress symptoms.
Yeah.
Yes, which mimic those of PTSD.
Mhm.
Yeah.
And it's also important to highlight that not everyone who works in this field or works like a traumatic incident is going to end up with a diagnosis of PTSD, because we all come into it with different backgrounds and different capabilities, I'll say, of being able to handle those different things. Like your bandwidth for those types of incidents can be very different. And the mechanisms that you've put in place, whether that be support systems, debriefings, all of those things, it all plays a factor. These are all protective factors. So if you have a lot of that in place, you might still have some of the minor symptoms, but you're not going to end up with a full diagnosis. That also doesn't mean that the mindfulness and the breathing won't benefit you in some way. I think just being able to sit still and just do some really simple breathing techniques is one of the hardest things for most humans, but especially those of us who have worked in some form of public safety, because we're used to being fixers and doers and constantly going and multitasking. So just the thought of sitting still and taking a couple of deep breaths, like good deep breaths where you feel the stomach inflating and deflating like a balloon. That's one of my favorite ones. And it's one of the easiest ones to do. So maybe just doing that in between calls when you have a moment, or if you're getting up to walk around on your break. I know someone who would stop at every door frame, and as they walk through every door frame, they would take a really good deep breath.
Oh,
Um,
I love that. Okay, so we call those habit triggers.
yeah.
When we teach these things to people, we say, find your habit triggers. Find something that will spark you or tell your brain or your body, oh, when this occurs, I'm going to use this tool. And
Mhm.
so every time you go through a door frame, you take a deep belly breath. That's beautiful. Yeah, that's a really good tip. Hot tip there. Um, okay, when we first met and we first talked on the phone, you said something, and I'd like to talk about that right now if we can, because you left the profession,
Mhm.
and do you feel like maybe you stayed on a little too long without any interventions?
Probably about a good 6 months to a year. Yeah.
Yeah. So you left the profession, but you did say to me, and I wrote this down in my notes when we talked, you said you do believe that it's possible
Mhm.
to stay on the job healthfully.
I
Um,
do.
yeah.
Yes.
So yeah, because I don't want anyone listening that is this is their profession. I don't want them to think, oh heck, well, I don't know what else to do, and I've got this many years in, and I'm, it's my health insurance and all that. So you have a firm belief, as someone who sat in the chair, that
Mhm.
you don't have to leave the profession. Some people will inevitably leave the profession, and that's fine too. But if you could talk to that a little bit about your opinion about what people need to do so they don't have to leave. They may love the profession and love that community, So what are your thoughts about that?
Yeah, I mean, I made a very individualized decision for myself to leave this profession. And I had a lot of other factors that maybe some folks don't have, because I have a spouse that's doing this same role. And so it's very hard to separate work-life balance when both of you are in it that much. So again, I had different circumstances, and I stand by that I made the best decision for myself. But I also want people who are, kind of on the fence. Maybe they're struggling a little bit. They're not sure. They're up in the air. Like, do I leave? Do I stay? What can I do to stay if for financial reasons I really need to? What are my options? And I found a lot of things throughout my journey of all the other stuff that I've done since then that I wish I had known about prior. Do I think it would have made a difference? I'm not sure if it would have made a difference in my life, but I do think these are good resources that could be helpful for folks who are currently, weighing those decisions. One of them is peer support. And so when I say peer support, it doesn't have to be like a real formal peer support thing at your center. There's an awesome group called Safe Call Now. They're based out of Washington, but they have resources in every state, from what I understand. And it is staffed by other peers that have worked in public safety. So I think calling something like that and just getting some more information and finding out what resources they have and being able to talk with someone who maybe is a little more removed from your situation, that doesn't have any like personal interest in you staying or going, but can just be a good sounding board to help you talk through some of that, can be really helpful. And I say peer support too, because as a starting point, because some people are maybe not sure about going to a counselor or someone who has a degree. There are some really good counselors out there, and there are some that definitely do not understand the culture of public safety. So if you think it's a little bit more severe and seeing a counselor would be helpful, I think they can be a great tool to help you kind of come up with some good coping things and some other practices to help you stay in the job longer and figure out if it's possible for you to continue on before making the decision to leave. But if you're going to go that route, do some research, use like the Psychology Today website, and look for counselors that have trained in or have competencies related to public safety culture.
Yes. Oh, such a great point.
Yeah. And don't be afraid to like try them out. I know some of them have extensive waiting lists these days, but if you go to one and it's just not clicking, like it's not a good match, don't feel like you have to stay with that counselor. You can,
But
try.
also don't give up.
Yeah, don't give
Yeah.
up.
Yeah.
And don't let the cost defer you either, because there are some that will see you on sliding scales. So if they don't take your insurance, like they're a private provider, they still might see you on a sliding scale, or they might have some type of grant funding or something that they can offset it. One of the counselors that I see, they have a financial assistance program, and they don't highly advertise it, but if you ask about it, they do have a form and you fill it out and you can get up to like 6 appointments for free if it's approved.
Oh, that is great advice. Okay.
So
Yeah.
sometimes you just have to ask about some of those things because they don't put them out there.
I think a lot of people, I'm going to interrupt you really quickly if you don't mind. These are such great points. I think a lot of people are mentally overwhelmed at the prospect of looking for a counselor. And I understand that. I'm trying to create resource directories and resource lists so that people can have places to go to make calls to ask the right questions. Because to your point, if you're in public safety, you want to find a culturally competent therapist that's trauma informed,
Yes.
and that understands the culture. That is an excellent point. And so that Safe Call Now, finding those unofficial peers, because I know as soon as you say peer support, people immediately, their brain goes to organized peer support. And there are still a lot of agencies across the country that don't have peer support teams. So I hope you heard Wendy when she said it doesn't have to be formal. A peer is just someone who has done something similar to you and understands your perspective. And that is what I hear from people more than anything else about my books and Pause First Academy, is they have found a place they can go and hear from their peers. So in the books, people who have read them have said, I didn't think anyone else felt as bad as I felt. And I read this person's story. It so closely mirrored mine as a firefighter or whatever it is. So yes. So you guys, don't think, well, my organization doesn't have peer support, so that's out. It doesn't have to be formal. It's just finding somebody in the realm to talk to, rather than a buddy who doesn't understand, over some beers, you're trying to talk to them. Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, yeah, all great points with that for sure. And then the last one that I want to really plug is the Department of Aging and Rehabilitative Services in the state of Virginia. They're called DARS, and so all states have it. They're just maybe called something a little bit different in each state. But with that department, it's a state department, and they are focused on helping people find and achieve sustainable employment. And in the case that you're in a profession or in a job that's maybe not a good match and you need some help getting retrained or figuring out like how your skills transfer into another type of position, these counselors they have expertise in doing that, helping you figure out what other options might be and helping you revamp your resume, apply for jobs in those fields, and do like mock interviews to really help you get into a job that is then a better fit for you. So if you're thinking, what do I do with all of the skills that I've gained as a dispatcher? Because I mean, we're pretty awesome at being able to multitask and typing, and we have these great telephone skills, great radio skills, great communication, things that can be easily applied in so many other jobs. But maybe you don't know what's available in your area that fits that criteria. Check out DARS. Meet with a rehab counselor through them and work through the process. It's voluntary, so you can stop or start at any time. But if you see the process through and really embrace what they have to offer, they can be a tremendous resource.
Man, that is such a great tip. And I'm going to look into this a little bit, do a little bit of research and see um, if, for instance, the state I live in is do we have that agency, or is there one similar? I'm going to look into that a little bit.
Mhm.
Um, that's
And
really great advice.
it can sometimes be misleading by their name, at least here in Virginia, that it's the Department of Aging and Rehabilitative Services. So sometimes people think that it's more, just for those who are older, and that's not the case. I will say that if you do have to have a documented disability, I believe, as part of the eligibility process. But if you don't have that already, so like in my case, if I would have went to them prior to getting my diagnosis, then they would have referred me and helped me connect with a counselor to get that diagnosis. And then I would have come back to them for help throughout the rest of the process.
It sounds like a great place for someone to start.
Hmm.
Um, and they'll just support you and walk you all the way through it. So this is something I would have never known. This is why I love talking to you guys, because
I
this is
know.
something I would have never known.
It's definitely a hidden gem. And I'm like, are you kidding me? Like, I discovered them in 2021. Yeah. And I was like, how helpful would this have been like 10 years ago when I
For
was in
sure.
a place where I was trying to figure out, do I walk away or do I stay? Um,
Yes. Thank you so much for sharing that. I can tell you have a ton of great resources and tips and tricks and tools and all kinds of stuff. Um, Anything else before we kind of start our slow wrap up today? Are there any other interventions or anything else you wanted to make sure and talk about today that you're willing to share with people? That was a good one.
I mean, I'll just throw out some other things that I've tried. So I've tried a lot of formal type things and also more informal. So journaling, creative writing. I took some creative writing classes at a community college that were very helpful in just me getting out some of my feelings on paper. And I think that had a huge impact then when I got into counseling, because I had all of that work that I could take to my counselor and kind of show like,
Yeah.
well, this is already what I've been kind of spiraling out, and I was just in a better place to reflect on it by using some of those things. Um, I'm also a dog mom, a rescue dog
Mhm.
mom before. I've always had dogs, and they're a huge part of my recovery. They keep me grounded. They remind me to get outside. So getting outside, especially in the early mornings, if I can, for like 30 minutes without screens, just watching the dogs run around the backyard. Um, it seems like such a little thing, but it's actually huge in like setting my tone for the day, um, and just keeping me in that positive mindset of being grateful for the little things that I have. So gratitude journaling's another one that I've done over the years. So even if you don't want to go, the formal route and explore like counseling, there's all of these like self-help things that you can do and incorporate into your day that are still going to make huge impacts in your life. And you might not see those impacts right away, but after like a year or two of doing some of them, you're going to look back and be like, wow, I've had a lot of growth in this year just because of these little things that I've taken the time to do.
Great advice. And everything you're talking about, there's research to back it up. So
Hmm.
spending time with pets, there's research to talk about how that positively impacts your nervous system. So you haven't mentioned anything that's just so touchy-feely, airy-fairy that, it's just your opinion. I'm just throwing that out for people listening. Everything she's listed has research to support it as a viable practice. Yeah, so some great stuff. I'm also a big dog person, a big dog lover, and I can't imagine my life, without it, without my dogs. Um, I think that a lot of people probably are overwhelmed. I think this is common, overwhelmed by work, life, kids, home, job, and so we start listing all these great things, to do, and they think, I don't have 5 minutes in my day. I can't. It's another thing to add to my to-do list. So real quickly before we start our wrap up, what would you say to someone who says, "This all sounds well and good, and I'm happy for you, sis, but I'm so overwhelmed. I can't add anything else to my to-do list."
There's a really good quote that I think describes this, and it's the find the time for your wellness, or like you'll be forced to make time for your illness. And I think that's something I've seen play out in my own life. And so, as much as I've had those moments where I've got stuck in that loop of how am I going to fit in a body scan today, or how am I going to, make sure I get 8 hours of sleep because I got to be up super early to go do whatever tomorrow. I have to constantly remind myself of that and make the time. Like I truly have to make it a priority. Um, because I know the other side of it, and I remember those years that I had where I was cycling, and I don't wanna go back there. Those were not fun years for me, for my family. Yeah, I'm not going back there. I've fought way too hard and worked way too hard to get where I'm at. Um, I'm out of what they call survival mode because I
Mhm.
was really in this survival state for so long. And if someone is feeling that busy, there's a chance that your body is close to that survival mode or in it. So just slowing down. I know it seems like we can't, and we say that, like we say, I can't, and I don't know how, and just make the time. Like the world is not going to end. Not everything is an emergency. It was really hard for me to stop operating in that emergency mode because I was so used to every time I picked up the phone, it was an emergency and you had to jump into action. Um, but when you're outside of that center, everything else does not need to be on that same timetable, and it's okay. It takes
Gosh,
a while
yes.
to adjust to that mentality, but, it's so needed in the world today because I see that with so many people, workplaces, not even just public safety, but just kind of across the board. We are definitely an overwhelmed society.
For sure. We talk about this a lot in our classes,
Mhm.
that people are operating on autopilot in survival mode, and for 25, 30 years
Yeah.
operating like that. It fries out your adrenal glands. It fries your nervous system.
Mhm.
There you're inevitably going to have mental, emotional, and or physical, or all of the above problems and issues. So I think that my takeaway from what you just said is the word make time for it. The time is not going to magically appear. If you keep repeating, I'm too busy, I'm so overwhelmed, then you're stuck there, because this busyness and this survival mode, like you described it, becomes habitual, right?
Mhm.
It's a habit. It just becomes so ingrained. That's kind of how you're living your whole life. Unfortunately, that then impacts the people in your family, the people in your household. They are going to feel and sense that survival mode. And so you have to make the time and start with a minute, like, or 5 minutes, but
Yeah.
you have to make the time. And it really boils down to you're making the time for yourself. So
Hmm.
here comes this term that some people roll their eyes at, but it's self-care. It's a
Yeah.
real and deep and true and transformational self-care. So
Hmm.
I think first you have to open up your mind and heart to the idea that self-care is crucial. It's not an option. It's not optional.
Right. It's crucial. And, I mentioned earlier as part of my recovery. So I explained my mental health journey as now I'm like in the recovery phase. I'm never going to be out of that. Like that recovery for me is ongoing. And part of that recovery, that journey is making myself a priority, being a little selfish at times, and making sure that I'm getting my time to do my body scans, making sure that I'm getting 8 hours of sleep every night, that I'm spending time away from screens. Um, you know, there were a lot of days that I would sit and I would scroll through Facebook or Instagram or all of those things. And then when I really sat down and I thought about it and I started using the tracker on my phone to tell me like how many hours a day I was on my phone, I was on there like 4 and 5 hours a day. And that's not counting the time that I spend in front of a computer for my actual work that I do. And I was just like, no, this can't happen. So if I've got 4 or 5 hours that I can spend scrolling on Facebook, I need to reprioritize that. And instead of spending 4 or 5 hours, maybe I spend a half hour to an hour checking in with the family and friends that I really got Facebook for, to maintain that social connection with. And then the rest of the time, I get outside away from screens. I spend some time with my dogs. I do the body scans. I do all of those things that I felt like I didn't have time for.
Oh man, that's gold right there. That's money. Those
Hmm.
last couple of minutes, that's money, people. That's money. She's giving you a hot tip. I go check your all of our smartphones track how long we're on social media. Go check and see how many actual hours in a 24-hour period you're on social media. And maybe you can find 15 minutes there, or 30 minutes there for yourself.
Hmm.
All right, let's leave it with that hot tip and let's talk about how people can get a hold of you. I mean, there are organizations and conferences across the country that are looking for veteran, good, speakers that can really speak to their audience. So, how can people reach you?
So the best way, I have really good boundaries, like we've talked about, and I've learned not to always be available. So I run any type of communication for requests like that through my LinkedIn page. Uh,
Perfect.
so if you just search for my name on LinkedIn, it's not going to be that hard to find me. I have it listed that I'm a former 911 dispatcher, and you'll see some of the other work that I've done. As far as mental health awareness, I currently work in a role that focuses on suicide prevention. So you'll see some of those things there. But yeah, I'm not hard to find. And then
Okay, spell out your name, spell out your whole name for people. So if they want to go on LinkedIn and look for you.
sure. So it's Wendy, Wendy, and last name Bundy, Bundy.
Okay, I had you spell that because some people spell Wendy with an I, and
They do,
yeah,
yeah. I'm spelled the same way as in like the Peter Pan
there
series.
you go, there you go. And it does list former 911 dispatcher, so that's a good identifier for people to find you. And that's a great way for you to set a boundary and still have a
Mhm.
communication channel for people who want to bring you in as a speaker.
Right. And then if we
Yeah,
need to go offline in a different means from there, I can always share my email and stuff with folks off of that platform.
perfect. Okay. Any closing thoughts?
Oh goodness, we've talked about so much. We crammed a lot into
Yeah,
this.
we've covered a lot. I'm like really excited. I always get really excited to go back and rewatch these and listen. I take a bunch of notes, but I always learn more when I go back. Yeah, I think we've covered a lot. You've offered a lot of really good ideas and tools, and I appreciate that because I think that's what people really are needing. They're just needing ideas. Like,
Right.
yeah, and you've been there, done that. Talk about a peer. Like you've been there, done that. You are a peer
Right.
to anyone in public safety. So, and I know I've gotten to know this audience pretty well, and you guys really do listen to peers much more readily than outside people who don't understand the work. So
Yeah,
thank you for sharing.
yeah, I want to give a shout out to peers because in the state of Virginia, I am a certified peer recovery specialist, and I also train for that curriculum here. And so, peers are huge. We're doing great work. We're starting to get embedded into a lot more systems. And, so shout out to all the peers that are doing the wonderful work that they are. And I'm excited to see us get into even more arenas in years to come.
Yes, 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 because this peer support movement is saving lives. No joke. That is not hyperbole. The peer support movement is absolutely saving lives. So,
Mhm.
yes, shout out to all you guys willing to work in peer support, also making sure you're taking care of yourselves.
Yeah.
Please. It can't be all about helping others. Yeah.
Right. At some point, you have
Yeah.
to take that hat off and be a little selfish. Yeah. So be selfish. Take time for yourself. Take a vacation by yourself if you have the means to do so. Or
Yes.
combine it with like a conference trip. That's actually what I'm going to do when I travel to Florida. It's not only that conference trip, but it's like a little mini vacation for me. So find those ways to have that time for yourself. It's so important.
Good for you. Yes. And especially for peer support people, because we don't want to have to create a whole new um, profession that is peer support for peer support. We don't want to have to create peer support for peer supporters who weren't taking care of themselves. So
Mhm.
that, yeah, you have to practice what you preach, guys. Okay.
Definitely.
All right, Wendy, thank you so much for your time today. I appreciate talking to you. I knew this would be a good one. And I just thank you for taking the time, the effort, and the energy from your life to reach back for others. That's one of my favorite things in life, and almost everybody I talk to does some version of this. So thank you, because you could have just gone on, moved on, taken care of yourself, and just moved on. I love that you're willing to reach back, and I can tell you're making an impact. So thank you for that.
Thank you as well. I couldn't do it without other people giving me platforms like this to share it. So thank you for the work you do as well. It's been a pleasure.
Sure, it sure has been. I agree. All right, friend, take good care.
All right.
Bye bye.
Bye.